The night was quiet except for the sound of boots crunching gravel. Floodlights glared against the dirt field, casting long shadows. She stood in the center, her uniform still dusty from a recent mission, but her face calm, steady. Whispers cut through the air. She's lying. She made it up. She wasn't in combat. The voices stung, louder than the echoes of the battlefield that still lived in her memory. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the metal pinned to her chest. Every ion base seemed to pierce her like a blade. A colonel stepped forward, his tone sharp. "Do you really expect us to believe you fought in that ambush?" The crowd leaned in. Some smirked. Others simply waited for her to crumble. Her mind flashed back, gunfire ripping through the night, the smell of smoke, the cries for help. She had been there. She had pulled her brothers out of the mud with her own hands. But here, standing in front of them, her truth felt small against their doubt. She swallowed hard. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I was there. You weren't." The colonel laughed. "A story doesn't make you a soldier. Show us proof." Her heart pounded. Proof. How do you prove the blood under your nails, the ringing in your ears, the screams that never leave? How do you prove survival? A heavy silence followed. Even the wind seemed to pause. She held her ground, though her knees threatened to give way. Then, just as the colonel opened his mouth again, a low rumble rose in the distance. Tires against asphalt. Engines in unison. Soldiers glanced toward the gate. Headlights cut across the dark. One voice broke the silence. "Wait, is that the president's convoy?" The colonel's smirk faltered. The entire crowd turned. Black SUVs rolled to a stop, their lights flooding the field. Doors opened with sharp precision. Secret Service agents stepped out, scanning the area. And then, the door of the central SUV opened. She froze, her breath caught in her chest. Why here? Why now? The convoy hadn't come for the colonel. Not for the others. It had stopped for her. Her hands clenched as 1,000 questions raced through her mind. Why would the president's team come here? Did someone believe her story? Or was this another test she was about to fail? The colonel's face turned pale, his voice caught in his throat. What is happening? Every eye turned to her again, but this time, it wasn't doubt that filled their stares. It was fear. And then a Secret Service agent spoke into his earpiece, glanced at her, and gave a subtle nod. They're here for her. Engines idled, low and heavy, making the ground hum beneath their boots. Dust swirled in the headlights, painting the night in gold and gray. Soldiers who had mocked her a moment ago now stood frozen, unsure if they should salute, step back, or simply disappear. The colonel's voice cracked. "Stand at attention." But even he couldn't steady the shake in his words. The Secret Service agents moved with practiced precision. Their suits caught the light, their hands resting close to concealed weapons. They scanned every corner of the field before stepping aside. And then he appeared. The president himself, dressed not in the polished stiffness of a ceremony, but in a dark coat, his face set with a gravity that silenced everything. Even the night air seemed to pause. Her throat tightened. She had seen him on screens, in speeches, distant and unreachable. Now he was walking toward her. Every step echoed like a verdict. The colonel straightened his uniform, trying to regain control. "Mr. President, sir, this is—" But the president didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on her. "You," he said simply. His voice carried weight, not loud, but undeniable. "You're the one." She swallowed, her lips dry. "The one, sir?" For a moment, the president studied her, his gaze sharp yet almost sorrowful. Then he turned to the colonel. "Is this the soldier you accused of lying?" The colonel stammered. "Sir, there were doubts." "Doubts," the president repeated, his voice low. "I was there when the reports came in. She didn't just fight. She saved lives." Gasps rippled through the ranks. The whispers that once tore her down now turned to shocked murmurs. The president stepped closer. His voice dropped, meant only for her. "They told me what you did that night. I needed to see you myself. The country needs to see you." Her chest rose with a sharp breath. Heat burned behind her eyes. For months, she had carried the weight of disbelief, the sting of mockery. Now, the most powerful man in the nation was standing here, cutting through every lie with a single truth. The colonel's face drained of color. He lowered his gaze, unable to meet hers. But the president wasn't finished. He turned to the crowd, his voice rising. You questioned her. You mocked her. But remember this, without her courage, without her sacrifice, men who stand among you today would not be alive. Silence followed. Not one soldier dared to move. The president looked back at her, his eyes steady. You're coming with us. Her pulse thundered. With you, sir? He nodded. There's something the world must hear, and only you can tell it. The words hit her like a storm. The whispers of doubt that haunted her now clashed with a new, terrifying thought. If she went with him, her story would no longer belong to her alone. It would belong to everyone. Her hands clenched. The night seemed to hold its breath. And then the president extended his hand. The president's hand lingered in the air, steady, unshaken. Every soldier watched, their disbelief carved into their faces. The colonel shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight, but he said nothing. Her fingers twitched. For months, she had begged them to listen, begged them to believe. Now, the moment had come, yet her body refused to move. She heard her heartbeat in her ears. Quick, heavy, almost louder than the convoy engines. One step forward, and her life would never be the same. Her voice came out as a whisper. Sir, if I tell my story, it won't just change me. It will change them. Her eyes swept across the field, meeting the stares of those who mocked her hours ago. She could see guilt etched into their silence. The president's gaze softened. Sometimes truth has to break before it heals. You carried this burden alone. Now, it's time for the world to carry it with you. Her throat tightened. She remembered the mud, the blood, the chaos of that night. The cries for help still echoed in her memory. She had dragged her comrades through smoke and fire, not for glory, but so they could live to see another sunrise. Now, those same comrades stood among the crowd, avoiding her eyes. The colonel finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Mr. President, with respect, we cannot. The president cut him off with a single glance, cold as steel. You've done enough. The colonel froze, his mouth snapping shut. Her hands shook. She wanted to scream at them, to ask why they had turned their backs on her, why they had chosen to erase her truth. But the weight of the president's words silenced the storm inside her. She slowly lifted her hand, placing it in his. The crowd stiffened. It was done. The president gave a nod to his agents. She's coming with us. 2 Secret Service agents moved closer, guiding her toward the black SUV. She walked past the colonel, past the soldiers who once laughed at her, their faces pale in the glow of the convoy's headlights. One of them whispered under his breath. She wasn't lying. She heard it. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel small. As she reached the SUV, she paused. The night was heavy, the silence thick. She looked back one last time. The colonel stood rigid, but his eyes betrayed him. Fear, regret, shame. Her voice cut through the night. You'll never erase what happened. Not anymore. And then she stepped inside the SUV. The door shut with a heavy thud. Inside, the world went quiet, save for the steady hum of the engine. She leaned back against the seat, her hands clenched tight. The president sat across from her, his expression unreadable. This won't be easy, he said. They will try to silence you again. But this time, you won't be alone. Her breath trembled. She didn't know if she was ready. She didn't know if she could carry the weight of the truth in front of the world. But one thought echoed louder than the rest. She had been silenced once. She would not be silenced again. The convoy began to move, headlights piercing the night, carrying her toward a destiny she never asked for but could no longer avoid. The convoy cut through the night, engines steady and unyielding. City lights flickered in the distance, a reminder that the world outside had no idea what was about to unfold. Inside the SUV, the air was heavy. She sat across from the president, her palms damp against her knees. Every second felt like a countdown to something larger than herself. He broke the silence. You saved lives that night. They wrote the report, But reports fade. Stories fade. What doesn't fade is truth, told by the one who lived it. Her voice shook. But, sir, truth has already been twisted. They called me a liar. They turned their backs on me. The president leaned forward, his eyes steady. And yet you stood. That is why you matter. Her chest tightened. She thought of the battlefield, the crack of rifles, the roar of fire, the cries for help. She had felt mud cling to her boots, blood soak her uniform, heat scorch her lungs. She had carried men heavier than herself to safety, all while fear gnawed at her bones. And yet, when she returned, medals were handed out, names were praised, but hers was buried under whispers. She clenched her fists. Why now, sir? Why me? The president's voice was low, firm. Because silence is their weapon, and courage is yours. The SUV jolted as it turned sharply, entering a guarded compound. Armed personnel stood at attention as gates swung open. The world outside disappeared as the convoy rolled into the safety of high walls and bright lights. When the door opened, blinding flashes met her eyes. Cameras, reporters. The air buzzed with questions, shouted voices, and clicking shutters. She froze. Sir, I can't. The president placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You can. And you will. Her breath caught as she stepped out, the flashes like explosions in the dark. The crowd erupted with voices. Who is she? Is it true? What did she do? Her heart pounded as she walked toward the podium set in the middle of the courtyard. Microphones glistened under the lights, waiting for her words. She looked at the sea of faces, her body trembling. The same fear from the battlefield clawed at her, but this time there was no smoke to hide in. Only the truth. The president stood beside her, giving a single nod. She gripped the edges of the podium, her knuckles white. The crowd hushed, 1,000 eyes pressing against her. Her voice cracked at first, but then it grew. You accused me of lying. You said I wasn't there. But I was. And I remember every sound, every cry, every life I carried out of that fire. Gasps broke through the silence. Cameras clicked faster. She continued, her words sharp now, each one like a blade cutting through months of silence. You want proof? Ask the men who breathe today, because I refuse to leave them behind. Ask the ground still stained with blood. Ask the fire that tried to swallow us whole. The crowd was frozen. The president's eyes glimmered with approval. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of release. For so long, I begged to be heard. Tonight, I don't beg. I speak. And the truth will not be buried again. The courtyard erupted. Some reporters shouted. Some soldiers lowered their heads, and somewhere in the crowd, she saw one of her comrades, the man she had dragged through fire, wipe a tear from his face. Her knees almost buckled. But for the first time, they shook not from fear, but from freedom. And then, just as the applause rose, a sharp voice cut through the chaos. Lies. She's making this up. The words came from the edge of the crowd. A familiar figure stepped forward. The colonel. His face twisted with rage. The colonel's voice sliced through the air, raw and desperate. She wasn't there. She's rewriting history. Don't believe her. Gasps spread through the crowd. Cameras swung in his direction, capturing his every furious gesture. His face burned red, his eyes wild, as though the truth itself had cornered him. She gripped the podium tighter, her chest heaving. For a moment, fear clawed at her again. But then she saw it, the faces in the crowd. Not doubt, not ridicule, but belief. The tide had turned. The president's voice thundered, silencing the courtyard. Colonel, enough. But the colonel pressed forward, his words unraveling into rage. She's a fraud. She's nothing but Stop. Her voice cut him off, clear and sharp. The crowd went still. She stepped away from the podium, her boots striking against the stone floor, each step echoing in the tense night. She stood face to face with him now, their eyes locked. You weren't there. I was. And you will never take that from me again. The colonel's mouth opened, but no words came. His anger trembled into silence. The crowd watched as his authority crumbled in the face of her truth. And then, from behind the cameras, a voice rose. "She saved me." The words pierced the silence. A soldier stepped forward, his limp visible, his face pale under the lights. He pointed at her, his eyes wet. "She carried me out. I wouldn't be here without her." Another voice joined in. "She saved me too." Another soldier. Then another. Until half a dozen men stepped out of the crowd, their voices breaking with emotion. The colonel's face drained of color. His accusations, once sharp as knives, shattered like glass. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions, cameras flashing wildly. The world was watching. The world was listening. The president turned to her, his voice steady. "You don't need me to defend you. The truth is defending itself." Her body shook with relief. The months of pain, the silence, the humiliation, all of it unraveled as she stood there, not alone, but carried by the voices of those she saved. She looked back at the colonel, who now stood with his head lowered, defeated. Her words were calm, final. "History won't remember your doubt. It will remember our truth." The crowd erupted, reporters shouting, cameras blazing. The president raised his hand, calling for order, but her words had already been carved into the night. As she stepped back from the podium, her chest rose with a breath that felt different, lighter, stronger. For the first time, she wasn't just a soldier fighting for her story. She was the story. The convoy waited, engines humming, ready to carry her forward into a future she never imagined. But as she looked at the soldiers who once mocked her now staring in awe, she realized something deeper. She had already won. The truth had broken free. And now, the world could never unhear it. What would you have done in her place? Stay silent and let them bury the truth, or step forward and risk everything to speak it?